Cutting up gang, man. We back in the Milady barber book, going through pages 8 through 12. But first,
I have a barber test question. This is top secret information.
In the 17th century, during the reign of blank, noblemen wore wigs because the king, who was balding, did so. Louis XIV, Francis I, Pope Gregory, or Caesar.
let's dive into the Milady barber book to answer this question.
Verse 48.
Boy, been killing all of them haircuts. Back to back, 30 minutes, appointment time, you see me spinning. Top off, you see me winning. Everything better with a KP twin.
A long time ago, in different parts of the world, people had all sorts of beliefs and superstitions about hair. Every group or tribe had their own ideas depending on where they lived and who they talked to. First off, many tribes believed that if someone got a piece of your hair, they could put a spell on you. That's right, they thought hair had some kind of magical power. Because of that, only the most important person in the tribe, like the priest or the medicine man, was allowed to cut hair. They were like the barbers of their time, but with some serious responsibilities. Now, let me tell you about this old Greek guy named Pythagoras. He was a smart dude, a philosopher and mathematician. He thought hair was where your brain got its inspiration from. He believed that if you cut your hair, you lose some of your smarts. Crazy, right? In Ireland, people had their own beliefs. They thought if you burned or buried hair clippings with someone who had died, it would keep evil spirits away from them. Meanwhile, in some Native American tribes, folks believed that hair was so connected to the body that if someone had a lock of your hair, they could control you. Talk about some serious hair magic. Hair wasn't just about magic, though it also showed how important you were in society. For example, in ancient Greece, boys would cut their hair when they became teenagers. In India, Hindu boys would shave their heads as a sign of growing up. And when the Manchu took over China, Chinese men started wearing a long braid called a queue to show they were dignified and manly. In ancient Gaul, noblemen would grow their hair long to show their status. But when Caesar, the big boss from Rome, conquered Gaul, he made them cut their hair to show they were now under his rule. In Rome, whether you could wear a beard or not depended on who was in charge at the time. People loved to color their hair too. The ancient Britons were super proud of their long hair and would use special washes made from tallow, lime, and vegetables to make blonde hair shine. For darker hair, they used dyes made from plants, trees, and soils. The Danes, Angles, and Normans would get all fancy with their hair before going into battle with the Britons. In ancient Rome, a woman's hair color told you her class. Noble women would dye their hair red, middle-class women went blonde, and poor women had to dye their hair black. Later on, during Queen Elizabeth's time in England, it became stylish for men to dye their beards and shape them into cool designs. As time went on, religion, jobs, and politics also played a big part in hair trends. In the Middle Ages, clergymen had a special shaved patch on their heads called a tonsure. There was a big argument about what shape it should be, but the Pope eventually said all priests should go with the tonsure of St. Peter. Even though the church had a lot of rules, long hair and beards made a comeback. By the 11th century, priests were curling and braiding their hair and beards again until Pope Gregory said, "Nah, keep it short and clean." The tonsure stuck around until 1972 when the church finally ditched it. Rulers and kings were like the influencers of their time. Whatever they did, their people followed. In the 16th century, King Francis I of France accidentally burned his hair with a torch, so everyone else cut their hair short to match him. Then there was Louis Roman XIV, who rocked wigs because he was balding, and everyone else started wearing wigs too. That is the test question.
Then there was Louis Roman XIV, who rocked wigs because he was balding, and everyone else started wearing wigs too.
In the 17th century, during the reign of blank, noblemen wore wigs because the king, who was balding, did so. Louis XIV, Francis I, Pope Gregory, or Caesar.
correct answer is Louis XIV.
By the 19th century in France, people were all about that retro style, rocking variations of the Caesar cut, just like the early Roman emperors. Alright, now let's talk about razors and shaving. You know, those sharp tools barbers use to give you that clean cut. Well, the history of shaving goes way back, even before people started writing things down. It's hard to say exactly when folks started shaving, but we do know some cool facts. Way back in the Upper Paleolithic period, which is like 40,000 to 10,000 years before now, people used early stone razors or scrapers. These tools weren't just for cutting hair, they were also used to skin animals. Imagine using a sharp rock to shave. Ouch. By the Neolithic period, around 8,000 to 5,000 BC, people had settled down, started farming, and raising animals. There's artwork from this time showing men with no beards, but we don't really know how they shaved. Now, let's hop over to Egypt. Around 7,000 BC, pyramids have given us some real treasures, flint-bladed razors. These were used by the ruling classes to shave their heads and faces. By 4000 BC, they even had tweezers. Can you imagine that fancy, right? As people moved around, they spread the practice of shaving. The Mesopotamians, around 3000 BC, used obsidian blades to shave. The Sumerians, by 2800 BC, were also clean-shaven. Over in Greece, by 1000 BC, men were visiting their local barber for a shave, yet even back then, barbers were a thing. Beards weren't just about style, though they had some deep meanings. In many early cultures, a beard was a sign of wisdom, strength, or manhood. It was even sacred in some places. In Rome, a young man's first shave on his 22nd birthday was a big deal. It marked his transition from boyhood to manhood and was celebrated with a huge party. For Orthodox Jews, beards are a sign of religious devotion. Cutting off a beard goes against Mosaic law, which is a big deal. Throughout history, there have been many rules about beards. Alexander the Great, for example, told his soldiers to shave so their enemies couldn't grab their beards in battle. Smart move in France. Back in 1096, the Archbishop of Rouen banned beards. This led to the first known barber guild forming in France. And get this, Peter the Great of Russia wanted people to shave so badly that he put a tax on beards. During the spread of Christianity, long hair started being seen as sinful. Clergy members were told to shave their beards. However, Orthodox Jews were still forbidden to shave their beards, but they could trim or shape them with scissors. Muslims, on the other hand, took great care of their facial hair. After prayers, they would trim their beards and keep the removed hair so it could be buried with them when they passed away. That's some serious dedication. Alright, so by the time we get to the Middle Ages, barbers were doing more than just cutting hair. They started to get involved in medicine too, yet you heard that right, barbers were helping out with surgeries and other medical stuff. This all happened because they were hanging out with monks and priests who were the smartest and most educated people back then. These monks and priests were the doctors of the time, and one of the things they did to treat people was called bloodletting. That's when they would let some blood out of a person's body to try and cure them of sickness. Sounds kind of weird, right? But it was a big deal back then. The barbers would help them with this. But then in 1163, Pope Alexander Roman III said no more bloodletting for the priests. He decided it went against Christian teachings. So who stepped up to the plate? You guessed it, the barbers. They took over the job of bloodletting and even did minor surgeries, gave herbal remedies, and pulled teeth. They were called barber-surgeons because they did both barbering and surgery. The first group of barber-surgeons started in France in 1096 AD. By the 1100s, they had their own guild, which is like a club or organization. This guild specialized in medicine and surgery. In the 13th century, they founded the School of St. Cosmos and St. Damien in Paris to teach barbers how to do surgery. Over in London, England, in 1308, the Worshipful Company of Barbers was formed to oversee and regulate the profession. This company had two types of barbers, those who cut hair and those who did surgeries. By 1368, the surgeons decided they wanted their own guild, but they were still under the control of the Barbers Guild until 1462. Even though the barbers and surgeons sometimes didn't get along, a law in 1450 united them into one big group called the Company of Barber-surgeons. However, this law also separated their jobs. Barbers were only allowed to do bloodletting, cauterization, that's when they burned a part of the body to stop bleeding, tooth pulling, and hair cutting. Surgeons couldn't act as barbers anymore. Then, in 1540, King Henry Roman VIII decided to bring the barbers and surgeons together again with a special charter, creating the Company of Barber-surgeons. They even got a famous artist named Hans Holbein the Younger to paint a picture to remember this event. But as medicine got better, bloodletting wasn't needed as much anymore. The barber-surgeons didn't have as many medical duties, but they still helped with things like giving out medicinal herbs and pulling teeth. In 1745, a law in England finally separated the barbers from the surgeons for good, and their alliance was dissolved. Barber-surgeons were also important in other places like France and Germany. In France, they formed their first guild in 1096, and later on, under the king's barber, they formed another guild in 1371. This guild lasted until around the time of the French Revolution in 1789. One of the most famous barber-surgeons was Ambroise Paré, who lived from 1510 to 1590. He became the greatest surgeon of the Renaissance period and is known as the father of modern surgery. When Europeans moved to America, they brought barber-surgeons with them to take care of the colonists. These barber-surgeons were super important because they helped keep everyone healthy. And that's the story of how barbers became not just hair cutters, but also important medical figures in history. It's amazing to think how much they've done over the centuries.